And welcome back, everybody. Thanks for sticking with us. Frank Tomaino is our guest. Frank is our go-to guy when we talk about local history, and that's what we're talking about today. Frank, more modern presidents in Utica? We talked about Harry Truman.
Harry Truman.
How big of a deal was that when he was here?
Well, it was a pretty big deal. You know, he was on his whistle-stop tour. But you know the story. Everybody expected him to lose to Tom Dewey, the whole thing. And I think he traveled 31,000 miles. He made about 350 speeches, and one was in Utica. But when his train came, I interviewed, Boyd Golder was mayor of Utica at the time. And they said, just the mayor of Utica and the mayor of Oneonta were going to be allowed to go and sit personally with Truman. Truman came out on the platform and spoke for a few minutes, you know, to give him hell, Harry, and that type of thing. And but Golder, I interviewed Golder years later, and he said, "What a nice guy Truman was, a regular guy, you know." And there's a photo. Boyd Golder's son gave me years ago a photograph that Danny Tranquilli took. They didn't allow any local photographers in the train, and there were policemen there. Danny Tranquilli walked right by him. He said, "Nobody's going to stop me from taking the picture of the president in Utica." He walked, and finally Truman said, you know, and they took the photograph, and I think Dave used it in his, Dave the Diak wrote an editorial on this a couple of days ago on the sitting presidents who came here. But Golder told me what a regular guy he was, Harry Truman. And
Boyd Golder was a regular guy, a gentleman,
you
wasn't
know,
he, Frank?
It's funny. One of my favorite presidents, Harry Truman, my favorite mayor, Boyd Golder. Mayor 1945 to 55 during the Loom to Boom. Tough guy, no nonsense guy. I think one of the reasons we got Utica College here is because, you know, he went to Syracuse and almost demanded, when Syracuse was thinking about expanding, we need a college in Utica. He was a fighter, good mayor. Good mayor.
After Truman, did we have any others, Frank?
After Truman, not sitting presidents. Of course, Truman was here again when he was, in 1952, Adlai Stevenson was running against Dwight D. Eisenhower, and Stevenson was a Democrat. And Truman, as sitting president, was campaigning for Stevenson, and he did stop in Utica again at the train station and spoke, you know, in favor of Stevenson. But after that, as a sitting president, of course, Obama, you know, landed at Griffiths and flew to, I think, by helicopter to Cooperstown. But I think Truman was the last sitting president.
We had President Bush here when he was vice president.
Yeah.
Speaking of Cooperstown, that's what he did too, as I recall correctly.
Yeah.
He
I
flew.
think you covered that.
I did, yeah.
He
flew into the old Oneida County Airport.
And of course, Teddy Roosevelt, whose sister, Corinne Robinson, lived in Jordanville when, and the Robinsons built the library there, the Memorial Library there in Jordanville, and her brother, Teddy Roosevelt, as president, came here and dedicated the library. He didn't come to Utica, but you know, he was in the area. And of course, Taft for the Sherman funeral. And
we had another connection. It was involving Holland Patton, though.
Grover Cleveland.
Yeah.
And he was here as sitting president. He was here. The village of Clinton celebrated in 1887 its centennial. In Cleveland, as a boy, had lived for a while in Clinton, went to school in Clinton. His parents moved to Holland Patton.
Minister, wasn't he?
Yeah, he was a Presbyterian minister. And they're buried in the cemetery at Holland. One of the first columns I wrote was I visited that cemetery, and I couldn't believe the parents of Grover Cleveland were buried in Holland Patton.
And the sister is not buried, though, in Holland Patton. She's buried in Italy, I think.
Right, Rose Cleveland, yeah. But I got a photograph of Cleveland when he did visit Clinton in 1887. There was a motorcade up Genesee Street, and I got a photograph of him on the busy corner in his car with his wife, Frances, and who was the Jackie Kennedy of her day. And there had to be 5,000 people there. And so far, I haven't used the photograph because you barely could see them. It's an open car. and there's the president, the sitting president, Grover Cleveland, and his wife. So, in fact, I talked to Carl Saporito the other day, maybe if he can maybe pull the photograph of the president and his wife, and maybe as an inset, some way to get it in the paper. Yeah.
Frank, what with all the research you've done over the years and continue to do, is there an area of local history that you like to get into that you really haven't gotten into?
Well, I would say probably. I was never that interested in the Civil War until I started, going back 150 years from my column. But to me, the loom to boom era, from I would say 45 to 55. Now, things have been written about that, but there was so much that went on. What did we do to attract so much industry? GE, Sperry Univac, Chicago Pneumatic, Bendix Aviation, Mohawk Airlines. What part did the chamber play? Who were the individuals involved? Now, some of, we've written about that, but there's so much more. Again, I interviewed Boyd Golder. He was in his 80s, and he was mayor during the loom to boom. And we spent 3 afternoons at the OD in the conference room. I didn't have any notes, we just talked. And I wrote a 3-part series, and he talked about some of the things, what they had to go through to attract some of these industries. I'd like to do more on that.
Maybe when you come back next time, if you're so kind, we'll talk about loom to boom.
Yep, no problem.
Good, thanks,
Yep.
Frank. Always a pleasure.
Yep.
That's going to do it for us this week. We'll be back next week. Don't forget CNYhomepage.com. Lots of good stuff there. Until next time, take care, everybody.